just in case. All right,
No, we're
fine.
good.
All right.
Oh, right! That's my Dante. The shadow of Devil May Cry 5 casts heavy on this day, which is kind of appropriate. Welcome to the Pitchy and Palscast. Looking at the Marvel movies, we're gonna be here forever. Looking at Marvel movies, it's all we do now, isn't that right, co-host Matt?
Well, we were just discussing that we're almost finished. There's no need for depression and sadness. I'm quite happy today. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, we've been enjoying... We seem to have enjoyed Captain Marvel, which we'll talk about first since that just hit and is ruining my plans to do these all in order. Doesn't matter. And and Devil May Cry 5 came out. I'm tying these two together. I'm not sure how much attention you pay to bullshit from Gamergate type people, but there was this approach coming from Gamergate of show those nasty yes Jew feminazis what's what, instead of seeing Captain Marvel, buy Devil May Cry 5 because that's a real manly thing for real gamer men.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know how to react to that.
So that's why, as we were arranging the viewing of Captain Marvel, I kept sending out Dante gifs.
Okay, I see now.
I was making a dig at that nonsense. Because it turns out that when you're that deep into a form of tribalism, you don't comprehend that, say, people might budget to purchase a game and also to go to the movies.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed both. So.
Well, there you go. Here we are. It's two white guys talking about Captain Marvel. Let's just go with Captain Marvel first. This is freshest in our memories. Should we do spoilies of the plot? Or just some form of plot summary while we're here?
I see a reason why not. No one's going to come and listen to a podcast for a movie they haven't seen yet that they're planning to. So I see no reason why not.
Yeah. So Captain Veers is a woman from the planet Hola? Is that yeah?
Hala.
Hala, yeah. I always forget that part because
Which doesn't really matter.
yeah, like pre-Volume 4, Captain Marvel isn't really stuff that I care about at all. It's another Superman knockoff from a space planet. And then with Volume 4, they transfer the powers to a more interesting character who has their own issues and things. So anyway, there's this woman on a planet called Hola who has the power to shoot light, which a lot of other people don't have around, but she's part of the state military, and she is going on her first mission to beat up some of those pesky, evil aliens, the Skrulls, who her kind, the Kree, are at war with. In the process of that, she gets captured by some of the Skrulls, who toy around with her mind. She has amnesia. They start trying to get some information out of her memories, and it looks a lot like she was an American fighter pilot in the late 80s and early 90s, which makes no sense for an alien from the planet Hala. So she busts out, smashes up their ship, winds up crashing on the planet Earth in the year 1995, and there she meets one Nicholas Joseph? I always forget. Yeah.
Joseph, yeah.
Yes, it is Joseph. Nicholas Joseph Fury, who works for this organization called S.H.I.E.L.D., and she goes on this little quest to try and work out who she is, as well as stop the Skrulls from doing some nefarious things. In the process of doing this, she discovers that, in fact, she is a human from the planet Earth, who was a test pilot for a secret space program that was working on a faster-than-light travel device, and that it turns out this was actually to provide the Skrulls with a way to find home, as they are in fact refugees. In particular, large chunks of the Skrull population have just civilians who were displaced refugees in the wake of this endless path of destruction that the Kree have been waging on them for a long ass time. And it is in fact the Kree who are doing nasty things, as we find out that her superior and mentor in the Kree forces is directly answering to Ronan, the bad guy who you may remember us talking about being a boring fascist last week. And then, in the process of all this, Carol learns things about herself. Captain Veer learns that her name is Carol Danvers, and she unlocks her full potential. She stops some bad people, and then she goes off to help the Skrulls find a new home. And that is a way to conveniently write her out of the MCU until her appearance in Avengers Endgame. Which is fine. Where do we begin when looking at this text? I guess we'll just go with, like, what are your general thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I made the mistake of listening to different opinions before going into it.
Oh no.
Which meant I had a very pessimistic view for the movie because I've mostly been hearing bad things. I started hearing some better things later on though, so I wasn't really sure what to expect going into it. I knew that I really wanted to like it. I've been a fan of Carol Danvers, the comic book character, pretty much since I started reading comics actually, which is actually pretty recently, as we talked before in a previous podcast. She was one of the first that I had experienced. This was where I had a bit of a personal stake in this, I suppose, where I was like, I really hope that the first Captain Marvel movie, does so well and ends up doing well. And I just really enjoyed this one. I felt that it was a little bit different than the other Marvel movies in that it...
So, sorry, keep going. I just... that there is a particular piece of fact-checking that I need to do right now on my phone. And the first result for Captain Marvel popping up is Captain Marvel post-credits scene explained!
Oh my god.
Ah!
Adam was telling me that this would be what was happening, and I didn't think that it would, but I guess, yeah. I really liked the fact that that the movie kind of went through the gears, and you saw this in the soundtrack really well as well. But like the way that it started out as a very highly militaristic kind of feeling, where our main characters are part of the Kree military, and they're going on very special ops kind of style missions. It was very dark in a lot of places, like very there's a moment in near the beginning of the film where they're going on a basic mission to hunt out some scrolls. There's like a spy who they're trying to recover who has intel, and like the place is like all dark and foggy and misty. How like war is.
I really liked the look of that sequence, and it struck me about how freaking easy this is to do, and how in the era of the extremely heavy green screen CG-oriented production that a lot of action movies go for, that there is so much that you can do just by throwing a bunch of goddamn fog machines in your green screen room, and how much that can change the look of things and the feel.
Yeah. And like I really appreciated that feel, actually, that atmosphere of just like it just wasn't very superhero at all. It felt like a very, like, as I said, like a very militaristic, very dark kind of theme going on. And I liked the way that the movie had that, plus whenever they were on Hala, there was almost like, maybe Blade Runner is true. There's probably a better way for me to put it, but that was the word that was going through my head with a lot of the music and the feeling towards it.
The lighting was very tech-noir as well.
Yeah. And it was... I love the way the movie started in that kind of way, and as things goes on and as Carol finds herself through the movie as this hero, the feel of it, the music of it, everything just kind of switches from that militaristic feel to the superheroic feel. And I really enjoyed that journey going on that.
Yeah, like... Where am I going with this? I'm probably going to have to cut this line while I just ramble to fill in a bit of time. But certainly, yeah. There is a question that has been going for quite a while now in Hollywood, which is superheroes as a movie genre just the new Western? Or the new musical? Or is this a genuine paradigm shift in what you do with mainstream movies to tell stories? Because... at this point, we are firmly at the point where there are so many genres in these superhero movies. Like, we looked a couple of weeks ago at Captain America the Winter Soldier, which was very clearly a spy movie, and yet is strictly speaking the same genre as Guardians of the Galaxy. And this one very much toes the line between a number of the genres that this genre has itself already moved through and played around with a bunch.
Yeah, I really like the way that, like with most of those examples, it's like just one thing, right? Like it's like Winter Soldier is a spy movie and a superhero movie, and like Guardians of the Galaxy is like an adventure kind of like almost, and got that comedic style.
That's a space opera.
Yeah, space opera. While with this, like you could feel like they were very confident in just moving through the gears and just going through like, this is what it's going to be like at the moment. This is what it's going to be like later on. And it's just, I think that's, especially in a, because how many of these movies there are and how long it's been, I think sometimes like variety, just even within a movie, can really help Just like if there's no more ideas, at least you can switch between them very quickly.
Yeah, and we're really seeing the consequences of not only the shifts of genre that have occurred up to this point, but the way that the audiences have been trained. Something I thought about a lot with the start of this film is going back to Guardians of the Galaxy, and I talked about how the placement of the Marvel title made a really heartfelt personal scene about losing a parent. Then transitioning into the space opera was a lot more palatable if you had this Marvel logo in there. And very early on in this movie, there is this scene with some very wacky editing as you see the scroll cycling through Captain Marvel's memories. And for people who don't exactly pay the most attention in movies, I can imagine them being a bit confused by this. But that this is well after the Marvel title has happened indicates that there is this real confidence that audiences can now comprehend the sorts of weird genre shifts that can happen when you go to a movie once you've seen that bumper.
That can only be a good thing, right? Like it.
Yeah. Like this is just the road was paved, and now we are walking along it.
Yeah, who would know that travel is much easier when there's a road there? So in that way, I guess I'm very thankful for Guardians of the Galaxy. If it means not just a fantastic movie in and of itself, but that it's helping movies like Captain Marvel, is definitely a really good thing, I would say.
My feelings on this movie, it's fine. I've talked before about how I had this truism about how every Marvel movie you can expect at least a 6 out of 10. And looking back, we've seen that the first half of the MCU, that was not really true. A lot of them were definitely below average flicks. But this one really, really feels like one of those standard bearers. The way a lot of people view Ant-Man. We're going to get to Ant-Man today. And I liked this more than Ant-Man. I think Ant-Man had higher highs and lower lows, whereas this was more even. So I guess we'll get into my first thing that I was thinking about with this movie, and I was kind of dreading. Carol Danvers is an American fighter pilot traditionally, and is in this lore as well. And there's a couple of repercussions for this in terms of the comic book lore for her. The first is that in the wake of the Kelly Sue... Actually, before I talk about any of that, I just want to make some notes about Kelly Sue DeConnick, who was the writer of the Captain Marvel comic series, the first one where she was officially called Captain Marvel, instead of Miss Marvel, the female sidekick of Mr. Marvel, but rather her own character as they killed off Marvel, and Marvel was fiddling around with trying to get some different creative voices in. Kelly Sue DeConnick was hired to write the new Captain Marvel comic. She did a damn good job, wrote a pretty dang fun story that's great until the obligatory crossover blockbuster means that she goes halfway through an identity crisis into suddenly being in the middle of a space war, and it sucks. But before that point happens, it's really good, and Marvel, after the initial announcement, did nothing to promote the comic, did nothing to sell it. They told her, like they tell every one of their creators, except for the ones that they like, that you're on your own if you want to promote this thing. And so she went in really, really hard, particularly in certain forms of grassroots promotion. Tumblr in particular, she was really, really big on promoting through her Twitter account. Any avenue she could find, talking to places like Comics Alliance, which is a news aggregator that had a fairly bustling community at the time. Since she knows that the only metric that Marvel and DC care about through Diamond Publishing is the pre-order sales. So she went really, really hard on buy the book by pre-ordering it. Here's some preview pages. See the sorts of things we're doing. Here's what the art's doing. Here's my rough outlines of where the story's going to go. Pre-order it right now. I'll mail you merchandise if you pre-order it now and join this mailing list and things. She went in really, really hard. And so it wound up selling quite well. I don't feel like going through the Comixology exact sales figures right now, but it was definitely far more than Marvel was expecting. And they learned nothing from it. So it's always a bit of a struggle, but certainly that really helped to give this sense of like, this is forming those tribal lines, which are unfortunately something that humans tend to do and are highly exploitable. So I guess I should talk about the movie now, unless you've got some other comments, because I mean, like, this was really the comic that got you reading Marvel Comics, because you went, oh, I'm going to check out comics, hey, this one seems neat, and then it was, hey, this is very neat.
It definitely got me into Marvel comics. I remember when I first started my comics journey,
It was Catwoman, wasn't it? Wait,
close.
yeah, there's the other one, the one that ran for a long time with the good characters that I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to let you go and try and guess. Cassandra Cain, the second Batwoman,
Yeah.
though the first to actually get a solo run, was the first thing that I started. And I think I found as I was reading those comics, what was interesting is that as much as I enjoyed them, they were kind of very old, or at least they weren't current. And I was like, okay, now I want to get into the current stuff. And I had all these like favorite characters that I'd kind of been reading, and I was like, how are they doing now? And they were all doing very poorly, like as in they didn't even exist. And then the same thing happened with Carol Danvers, where I was reading some of her early stuff, well, not really early stuff, but like stuff that wasn't current, with a guy called Brian Reed back when she was unfortunately in that swimsuit outfit. But regardless of that, they did what they could with her.
Reed is not the best of writers.
No, but it was okay, and I liked her enough that I wanted to continue. But I was expecting, just like with Sandra Cain and with Stephanie Brown, that there would be that there'd be nothing going on. And then, to my surprise, I was like, no, she's very popular, and that's how I got into the Kelly Sue DeConnick, the 2 volumes that she made. She also did a tiny little run on an Avengers comic that I really, really enjoyed with an artist. I just forget his name. He's an Italian, Stefano Castelli or something like that. And I love his art. And so they combined for a great little Avengers side story, which was really good. But reading those first 2 volumes from Kelly Sue DeConnick were definitely something that made me go, yeah, comics can be really good in this current age. And it's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of Carol now, really. Like if I hadn't have read those, I would have been like, yeah, I kind of like Carol, but it wouldn't have been as big of a deal to me as if it was. So I feel in some ways I do feel that even though Carol's been around for years, in terms of like the character now, a lot is owed to what DeConnick did in those 2 volumes.
Yeah, the MCU Carol does not say fuck anywhere near as much as DeConnick's version.
Well, you have to change some things, I guess. I would also plug DeConnick as a smart author probably does. She kind of left.
Got out of comics, so she's smart.
Yeah, and well, at the very least, she got out of Marvel Comics, and she's the only comics I think she does now are more independent ones. I think Bitch Planet is the one that she does now. So I would check her out if you're at all interested. If you've liked anything of current day Carol Danvers, you would probably enjoy some of the stuff that DeConnick does, because the best stuff of Carol is probably hers.
Yeah, and one of the legacy moments of that first volume of run that she did is it introduced a new Miss Marvel, who was a Pakistani-American called Kamala Khan, who has these small-town poor person in New York adventure things. It's like,
she's Spider-Man.
It's Spider-Man, but for people who aren't white men. It's for girls of color, and it's pretty darn rad. But there's always this unfortunate implication going on, given the time period that this was set in and written in, where because Kamala Khan takes up that moniker, even though her powers aren't really similar to the Marvel line of being Superman, where you fly and you shoot lasers and punch things. But it's supposed to be that Kamala is inspired by Captain Marvel and thinks that she's really cool and thus makes a similar sort of costume and then gets into the superhero gig that way. But it's very unfortunate based on the timing, because although comic worlds tend to have their own thing going on, Marvel comics in particular are very much tied into the politics of their time. And so her to be inspired by Carol Danvers means that she's inspired by the sort of jet pilot who most likely bombed the sorts of villages that her parents fled Pakistan to escape from the deaths of anyway. And that's a very complicated and difficult thing to be dealing with. And the comics basically just ignore this as a concept because that's too nuanced and difficult to discuss for a lot of their writers and especially their editors. So the way that the movie avoids any of this, since there will probably be a Kamala Khan at some point in the MCU, is that they wind back the clock and set up Carol as being a fighter pilot in... Well, the film's set in 1995, and so she's a pilot before women were allowed to be in the military to specifically do combat missions. So they dodged a bullet there, is what I'm saying. That said, she's still a pilot for the military, which meant that the American run had a huge amount of Air Force recruitment ads beforehand. As always, if you are in Hollywood and you are willing to depict the military in a positive light, you can get a very large amount of money from the military to fund your movie and make the military look even more nicer. Michael Bay loves to do this. And there's certain shots which were, again, most of this film wasn't very Michael Bay in the way it's shot. We're well past that era of Transformers casting the shadow over all filmmaking styles. But there's a couple of times where there's certain money shots involving aircraft, which were very Michael Bay. Very quick cuts. And I was wondering, because it's very easy to fall into a trap as Australians of buying into a certain sort of exceptionalism where, because late-stage capitalism in America is so horrifying, it's easy to say that, well, you know, things are different here in Australia. In a lot of ways they are. We have a much better functioning, not perfect, but still a much better functioning representative democracy. But we're still a military ally of the United States of America, and there's a lot of people in a lot of companies and in the current ruling party of this country who have similar sorts of worldview to the Republican Party of America. And so the cinema screening of this film that we saw also ran a big bunch of Air Force advertising, which was specifically tying into something which I guess we'll mention in a while, but basically, these weren't military ads for men, these were military ads for women. And that's always gonna make me... It's always gonna make me uncomfortable seeing military recruitment ads like this. So I was very worried that the film itself would be really real... Would be just a straight-up military propaganda film. It wasn't as heavy-handed as I was expecting, which I am cautiously optimistic about.
Yeah, I would say that
Was this something you thought about at all?
No, when I saw the Air Force recruitment ad before the movie, I was definitely like, I'm not a big fan of recruitment ads either, so I think I probably said a few pithy comments or something like that during it. But as the movie started, I actually really liked how little the military was involved. I mean, there was very little. You didn't see too much Air Force. There wasn't any generals. The only pilots you saw were generally the ones in their memories that were... No, there was like the sexist guys, and there was most of the military that I saw were generally like in her memories, and they were the ones holding her back, you know, calling her like names and saying there's no way you can be in the Air Force. And the only other person was her friend, Marina or something, Marie Rambeau. Who was like her, not allowed in the Air Force. And so I don't know, I was really happy in the way that I didn't think the Air Force they were barely in it, and what little was there was shown pretty negatively, I would say.
Yeah, the film was fortunately more critical of militaries than I was really expecting to, based on... That was basically all I knew about the movie, was that the American run had a lot of Air Force ads, and the same happened here. But the film opens up with something that reminded me a lot of Call of Duty Ghosts opening cutscene. Yeah, where not only is it very pro-military in the early stages as she's working for the Kree, but also the way it depicts the Skrulls has not only that they're shapeshifters and thus this faithless enemy, but the first lines you hear from Skrulls is just this inhuman wail. It's, oh boy, this is how you code foreigners as inhuman beasts right here. And that was the point, that you then learn that the Skrulls are very real people, and mostly Australian, which in turn has its own implications based on Australia's history of how it treats refugees. But I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll get into something.
What do we want to talk about? Just how the Kree and the Skrulls are represented and how they work in the movie, unless you want to get to that later.
Yeah, the Kree and the Skrulls, we can go with that because, of course, the previous appearances of the Kree in the MCU was they'd just finished a war with Nova Prime, and there were some rogue factions led by Ronan, the hot doctor from the Book of Henry. And
His famous role.
I'm mentioning that here because Ronan has a couple of mysterious appearances where he pops up in communications and is all, oh no, he's alive and he's associated with these guys, and now we know that these Kree are bad people as well. But the chief scene where you see him in person is him on a ship about to nuke the crap out of Earth, and Carol blows up all his shit, and then he basically says, and walks out the door, just like in the Book of Henry.
Yeah, there's this great scene. It's like very like general comedy, like typical kind of the comedy you'd expect, but it is a really fun scene where like she blows up a bunch of missiles and then one of their ships, and they just and then him and I'm guessing his second in command just like look at each other and like, yeah, we're out.
Just out that door.
We were very used to bombing like innocent nobodies who had no weapons of any kind. This is much tougher. Let's get out of here. No, I loved how the Skrulls and the crew were depicted in this movie. I love the twist. I was reminded a lot of we talked a lot of how much we loved the difference with the Mandarin in Iron Man 3.
Yes.
Where like even though in the comics the Mandarin's very, very different, we really liked the changes that they made. It really fit with the movie and what it was going for. And I felt very similar in this one in that I'm not going to say it's as black and white in the comics as the Kree are good and Skrulls are bad, but it's definitely closer to that than it is the other way around.
Yeah, like shapeshifting aliens being used to very clearly code be afraid of anyone who's not you, and be afraid of anyone who's acting or has any sort of different ideas to you because they may be secret postmodern cultural Marxists trying to undermine your society. And Skrulls are the sort of thing that can really heavily lean into that. I'm very happy with this because it hopefully means we'll never get Secret Invasion as an adapted plotline in the MCU, because that is a terrible storyline, which is like, not only is it just this kitschy, lazy, who can you trust type storyline, but it also has like really, really racist undertones and often overtones in that first time. So I hope that doesn't come back.
Shock horror, big major Marvel Comics event was not very good.
And the main thing I was really surprised about with this one being so Skrull time is that the most famous Skrull of the comics, Kl'rt, was not even mentioned once. Kl'rt is, of course, a guy who becomes the Super Skrull, a super soldier who has the powers of every Fantastic Four member rolled into one. How will they, as a team, overcome one who has all their greatest strengths but none of their weaknesses? And how will they defeat him if he has Firebrand working on his team as well? So Super Skrull can punch his hands while screaming Tenderizer, and Firebrand can swoop at you with an unblockable move, which he then combos into a snapback and then loops it over and over and over again. I'm talking about Marvel vs. Capcom 3 again, because it's the greatest game in the history of humanity.
Is that the end of the point? Is there more with Kl'rt? Or
No, it's like, because Disney owns the Fantastic Four now. Like, they've reacquired that ownership. And I was honestly surprised that they didn't throw any sorts of bones there, and I'm happy because you don't need to be doing that sort of shit.
Yeah, I really love that. I mean, there are a few characters that are that thing that often adaptations do where they just take a character's name and then it's really nothing like that character. Mm-hmm. I feel like in this one they didn't go down that path. There is Yon-Rogg, who is a very famous villain of Captain Marvel, who's a little bit different here, but who's played by Jude Law in this movie. He's slightly different from the comics, but his role is the same, so I'm perfectly fine. That's Yon-Rogg. He's a villain of Carol's. It makes perfect sense, and he still has that same kind of like, he's that Kree military guy who's an asshole. But,
and he has that wonderful final confrontation where
yes.
he gets halfway through that big speech of how you must now defeat me by yourself. Man to man, man to woman, no powers, just revealing our strength. And she just like shoots him halfway through and drags his corpse to a ship and boots him off the planet. It's pretty sweet.
That line, you can't ignore the fact that she's the first female superhero in the MCU, and like there's a lot of stuff that happens in the movie that you can kind of see with that. And like her, like, I have nothing to prove to you line really felt like a strong kind of like statement of the movie. Just like there's actually not like, it could have really leaned into the fact that she's a woman and like had a lot of, there was a few little things like she wasn't allowed in the Air Force properly because of that, but in general it just wanted to play the movie out itself. And whenever, you know, it had even an inkling of that kind of thing with Jude Law issuing that channel, she's like, no, I don't have to prove anything to you. You're just some shit.
Yeah, I was going to kind of bring this up as we got to Ant-Man, actually, but But I mean, we can do it now. It's all tied together. Everything is connected.
Oh, sorry, if we do like that thing with Klurt, in like the difference between that and like Yon Rog is that there's no reason for a character like Klurt to be one of those scrolls because those scrolls are such a different like narrative, like they're completely different.
Yeah.
So there's no reason. So yeah, that's all I was trying to say with Klurt. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to do everything related to this one facet of the brand all at once. You can do stuff that's relevant for telling a cohesive story.
You can just make a good movie.
Yeah, what was I going to say next about
Just like Ant-Man and,
power? Okay, no, we'll put a pin on Ant-Man until we actually get to Ant-Man. But... yeah.
It's the power of editing. Help us, yeah. You know, it can take a second to work out what you want to do.
There's a movie that came out in 2015. You might have heard of it. It's called Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And when I was in the cinema for that one, I was next to an 8-year-old girl, because it was a packed cinema, who was with a couple of older sisters. And when, in the middle of that big fight with Finn and Kylo Ren in the snow-covered forest, Finn got his ass kicked over and over and over again. But then the lightsaber got knocked out of his hands and was force-grabbed by Rey. The girl next to me lost her mind with excitement that this girl that she liked was going to kick some ass, and then did so. And basically it's taken, 20 movies for the MCU to have that sort of moment. And there's lots of moments in how this film is storyboarded that are, this is the moment for the girls to cheer. And much like, say, Spider-Man 3 had those moments with, like, Spider-Man flying in front of the American flag and things, having moments for the audience to cheer because a person that they like is doing something, and that's strong and powerful and it makes you feel vicariously powerful as well, that is a good thing to have in movies that are trying to extol positive messages. And there's lots of people in our society who popular culture, particularly big budget $200 million mainstream movies, simply don't get that. And this is one of those moments where they did. The people who are in my audience, I saw a girl excited leaving the cinema, but no big pop like that one. But that one really stuck in my mind as, yeah, like, this is a good thing to be having in movies, and it's cool. And I'm happy that it happens. I mean, I'm honestly pretty happy with this movie. Like I said, I was worried about it being really, really, really jingoistic, and it wasn't particularly, which is good, because, like, you need more people from more diverse sides just giving their own input and providing better perspectives on how to write these sorts of stories. And sometimes what will happen is, when you've got those broader voices, sometimes a broader voice will say a shitty thing, and you just gotta kind of let that happen. And this time, I think we, in some ways, dodged a bullet, and that's cool. Movie's pretty cool. We could spend like another 40 minutes being, oh, did you like the bit where Samuel L. Jackson was actually acting a character rather than being Samuel L. Jackson in a movie? Or do you like all those jokes with the cat?
The flirkin.
Yes, spoilers, the cat isn't a cat. It's an eldritch horror, and it's adorable. I want its tentacles to eat me. Can I say that on this show? Yes, I can say that on this show. I can say whatever I want. It's my show. Are there other things you want to talk about with Captain Marvel? Otherwise, I've just got a note about the 90s, and that'll do it, I think.
Yeah, it's a shame that I don't have more to say about it, because I really did enjoy this movie. I will say, I guess, I love that it was more low-key than most
But Tom Hiddleston wasn't in this one.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you can cut that. No, I really like the fact that the scale was... it just wasn't as large and bombastic as the other ones. And it didn't need to be. It was, I guess, primarily, it was about Carol finding herself as it was like a search for identity, right? Like, she has both amnesia and people lying to her about who she is, and the general situation of what is happening.
Yeah, you want Woman Getting Gaslighted the movie? Here you are.
Yeah, she is, and she's like, not just she's like held back not just by like verbal means and by like lies and manipulation. She's like literally held back by like a physical object that is like. And I love the way that and this kind of feeds into that kind of like that feminist kind of feel to it. Like she's continually fed these lies about who is looking out for her, B, what she can do and what she can't do. And I really love the fact that eventually she's able to peel back these lies. She's able to realize what the truth is, not just about herself, but also the situation at hand. And her realizing who she is also comes into how powerful she is.
Yeah.
Like it's like the same type of thing at the same time, right? Like
Yeah, a large chunk of this movie is people telling her not to use her powers, that she doesn't deserve to use her powers and she can't use them, even though time and again there's very clearly situations where the solution is to shoot something with a laser from your hand. And so, like, essentially one of her big moments is just being able to say, no, I could just use the fucking lasers, mate. And that's great.
And the way that
it's not subtle.
it's not subtle, but I think
it doesn't need to be subtle.
It doesn't need to be subtle. Yeah, it's the movie is what it is. And though I do like the sleight of hand though of in almost every other movie where there is a character who is telling a hothead, and she's kind of a hothead, sort of like she's a very cocky. She's and he's telling her, no, you need to be calm. You need to restrain your emotions. Like 99% of the time in a story, that character is the good guy, and they're like the old time mentor. And usually, what the character's journey is
learning
the main
the value of restraint.
Yeah, in this case, like that guy is the evil man. He is the
wait. Are you saying that the guy Carol Danvers works for is the evil person?
Yes, I am. It is now part of our lexicon. Thank you, Venom. But I really like the fact that the movie kind of combines that with like so there's like the feminist aspect with Carol and her personal journey, as well as the fact that this could have been quite a nasty film in terms of how it used the Skrulls to code like evil invaders like secretly infiltrating our society, and it manages to destroy both those like cliches.
Literally destroy them with a giant laser from your body.
Yeah, and I really like that. And maybe that's not, as you say, the most subtle thing in the world, but this was, for a movie that at times could be very dark and was not very bombastic. Like there's a lot of like bits in the movie where they're just like in the corridors and they're like just doing little spy stuff. They're running away. They're like learning mysteries, like talking with each other. It's a very feel good and wholesome movie to me. And
yeah.
I really appreciated it a lot.
Yeah, it was cool times.
Yeah.
I guess my final note from just the initial impressions is the way that it chose to depict the 90s as being the 90s is partly through the technology used, but almost entirely through the pop culture which is visible, which says a lot about that decade and the way that post-New Wave, that is how a lot of people understood things, is by what things are you consuming, which is not the best way to be understanding yourself. And if you wonder why someone who grew up in the 90s is ragging on capitalism every frickin' show, like this is just a subtle indicator of the sorts of reasons why on some level. So, Avengers, Age of Ultron. Would you like me to quote for you the opening line of Joss Whedon's audio commentary?
Sure.
Why would I do a second Avengers film? Throughout the audio commentary for that one, there was this incredible sense of exhaustion from Joss. The shoot was hellish, the writing process was hellish. There were a lot of arguments between him and Kevin Feige. It's probably a big part of why he didn't make any more MCU movies. Frankly, I'm glad he hasn't made any more, because I think far better creators have been on this franchise since then. But the exhaustion was incredible, especially in comparison to Ant-Man's audio commentary, where it was the director and the writer and I think the cinematographer. I can't remember, it's been a while since I listened. And there was this real palpable joy and energy. Oh, no, it was the lead actor. It was the writer, the director, and the lead actor.
I'm sorry, I know him, but I forgot his
Bootleg
name.
Chris Pratt.
Oh.
And there was this real excitement and joy that they'd got to make this big budget movie and that had a lot of fun doing it. And like this guy who's nobody's now a movie star and we're really happy for him. And it was such an incredible contrast. And we'll get to how I feel about the movie in a while, but when I saw Avengers Age of Ultron at the cinema, I told you at the time, like, I'm done with these movies for a while. Like, they're just going to be more like this. They're going to be these big things where you tell some jokes, you have some action scenes, and you don't really do much else. And it's like, yeah, I've seen what I'm going to get all that I can get out of these movies. So I'm not just going to watch them for a while. And I didn't until Civil War. So it was really just one that I skipped. Though, as I mentioned, I think the second episode, where it feels like there's just this constant, endless Marvel movies. Even though there are sometimes reasonable gaps between them, it still feels endless because even when there's not a movie available to watch at the cinema, the marketing is incessant and constant. And so I was just so exhausted with it all that I skipped one movie, but it felt like I'd skipped 5 when I got to watch Civil War. And that meant that I missed out on Ant-Man until we watched it last week. So that was my feeling at the time, and watching it again, I felt exactly the same. Like, I was complaining during the movie about how long the movie is and how much I was hating it, because it's a 2.5-hour movie, and its second act is like 40 minutes in. By the time they're all at Hawkeye's house talking about how they fucked up and need to make it right, I'm just... God damn it, we have another hour and a half of this shit, and I want out.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because it's funny that, you know, we, with the director's commentary, you start with Joss Whedon going because I think the start of the movie might be at least part of the best part of it, like because that opening sequence is quite fun, which doesn't really doesn't set you up for what is quite boring a little bit later on in the movie.
It's visual shorthand
yeah.
for this long-running comic series status quo that in a film franchise you simply don't get. And this film in general is essentially the whole of a status quo run right here. Like, if you want to spend a year just reading weekly or monthly comics, where it's all, what are we gonna stop this week? Oh no, how can the Human Torch defeat the Asbestos Man? This movie is the closest you get to that. How will the Avengers stop Genocide Robot Man? And the opening scene of that is then an even further microcosm of this week, the Avengers beat up Nazis. And they do. They all work together, they do stuff, they make some mistakes along the way, but they're being quippy, they're having banter. You get this sense that there's been developments between characters since the last time you saw them, but it's like you're catching up, seeing where their lives are at now and their day-to-day life of being the Avengers, and that's neat.
Yeah, that opening sequence is it's a tremendous amount of fun, really. Like, there's not much really else to it, but it's just nice to get reacquainted with these characters and seeing them work together.
It's the best quips as well. Like, there's the mind your language stuff with Steve Rogers. There's the bit where the head of the Nazis does the big rah-rah, we will never surrender, followed immediately by muttering to his aide, I'm about to tender our surrender. There's the gags at the secret exit. There's Iron Man shooting a bunch of dudes with stun guns. He makes some quip. He's all like, yeah, that was completely painless. And then one of the guys goes, no, it wasn't, or something like that.
Yeah, it was like, good talk, guys, good talk. It's like, no, I wasn't.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Good talk. No, it wasn't. Yeah. There's just this real energy. And in the cinema, absolutely, there was an excitement and joy and laughter in the crowd, I remember. And I remember that tapering off as the movie just goes on and on and on. It's the $300 million film of excess, and it made me so tired. I'm just, can't we do something arty, please? Can we be pretentious? Just for a bit.
It definitely just, like, it has that syndrome of being the movie before the actual proper things happen. Like, it's a very, like, as you say, status quo. There's a very just waiting room kind of feel to it. And that's a problem when this is your big time event. Like, this is like Avengers 2. This is when all your characters get together, and it's supposed to be, this is usually when the big stuff is supposed to happen. And generally when they get together in other movies, like say in Infinity War and in Civil War and presumably in Endgame, there will be some really big time events happening. But this one is the only one where a lot of the Avenger characters are together and there isn't that much going on, which is a real problem, I would say.
Yeah, There's, like you mentioned Civil War there, and as we'll get to when we get to it, which is probably next episode, like, that movie is kind of simultaneously Iron Man 4, Captain America 3, and Avengers 3. It's a very complicated movie. Whereas this one is... It's like watching 5 episodes of Justice League Unlimited. And that's part of what makes Justice League, the TV show, such a fun show, is that you got this group of characters just solving problems every week. Often in 2-parters, so... First half is, oh no, everything's gone wrong for the team. And then the second half is, yay, now they've made everything right again. Whereas when it's in movie form, you're not having that week-to-week engagement with them. It's like you spend months thinking about how good it's going to be, and then you get there, and it's just okay. And that becomes a letdown, if not bad, as a movie-going experience.
It's like just the wrong format for this kind of a story. Like we've talked before a lot on this podcast about, usually with anime, different kind of, like with, I remember the Gundam trilogy where it's like trying to condense a lot of seasons worth of television into 3 movies. We've had Battle Angel Alita, where we were like, they were clearly trying to go through the whole volume of Battle Angel Alita and put it into one movie.
3 volumes.
3 volumes, sorry. And now with this, it really felt, either conversely, you could look at it either way, I think. It's like an entire just like humdrum run of comics between like a big event put together, or it's a bit like an entire season of television, which I think fits probably more because it's Joss Whedon who is mostly a showrunner. It very much felt like a showrunner trying to cram a week-to-week kind of television show all into one.
Yeah, that's the right read, I think, because an exact line I have here from his commentary is, it felt like we were making 13 different movies.
Which is a problem.
yeah, like, rethink what you're doing with this movie in that case. And I think the biggest problem with the way the characters are, and the status quo and things, is that for characters that have changed and the like, or what sort of characters interaction there's going to be, the only meaningful one for a big chunk of the movie to begin with is Black Widow and Bruce Banner, which is a relationship which has spontaneously appeared out of absolutely nowhere. They shared exactly one scene together in this franchise before this movie. And so that's the sort of thing where if you're going into an intimate romantic relationship, you want to really actually feel for it and root for it. Get those teasers of will they, won't they, and now that they're together, you're, oh yes, we finally got that moment. You want to build to that payoff. But now that's just here. This is a thing and an idea that's now present, and it's going to be explored really, really blandly and sloppily.
Some of the worst parts of the movie with Bruce Banner and Black Widow. Which is a real shame because...
it's a real shame because I love people being horny.
Also that. It's also a shame because they're really interesting characters themselves, and I was going to say in particular Mark Ruffalo is really good, but you know, I mean, Scarlett Johansson does a perfectly reasonable job with...
Yeah, like
Black Widow,
I prefer her playing a Russian over playing a Japanese woman.
So, you know, they're both good characters themselves, and it's a shame that there's so many scenes in them where I don't care for them just because this relationship kind of sucks the life out of them. It's also a shame because in the context of this podcast, I feel like, I don't know, have we ever liked... I think we've been unlucky with romance in the movies that we've watched. I feel like whenever we talk about romance, it's always a bad thing. Like we talked about how...
Quill and Gamora's the closest we've got to something interesting at this point.
Yeah, and I don't just mean like in the Marvel movies. I mean like all the movies we've done. I feel like we've been pretty unlucky.
Well, look, we haven't gotten to Jane Austen month where we just watched the BBC Pride and Prejudice, because I can watch Colin Firth in that all day. Oh my goodness. That scene where he's finally turned around, he's gone from full Sun to full Dere, and he confesses his love and proposes to Elizabeth. Oh my goodness me, that scene is so juicy. And he is so moya there. And it's the best. And we'll get to it one day because I love that miniseries.
So yeah, like what I'm trying to say, I guess, is like, you know, I don't think either of us hate romance. It's just that like
we haven't had good ones on this show.
Yeah, and this in particular is quite bad. It's there's probably are examples of having a time skip and having significant changes happening in relationships where it works, but I feel like for whatever reason... I
mean, Hulk in Thor Ragnarok's a good example, where he just appears as this grand conquering king who's got some real mental baggage going on that he's clearly trying to run away from, and it really, really works there to just suddenly have the King of Arena be Bruce Banner popping up.
I think it also works there because the core issues that he had before those movies are still there, and we still get to explore them. So we don't feel like we haven't been cheated out of anything.
Yeah, it's expanding on stuff that was already there rather than now there's this thing.
And I feel like that's one of the worst things that can happen in storytelling in general, no matter what kind of format you're doing, where you just kind of throw something out and the audience kind of just feels like, that doesn't make any sense, which is a problem. But I think even more importantly, that they've been robbed of like seeing this, what could be an interesting thing happen, and they don't know why it happened, but they didn't see how it happened, and it's just kind of like, oh, okay. And there's just no investment that's been built up there. And you can see that not only in Age of Ultron, but like I felt like it was a very awkward thing in Infinity War as well, where it's like I felt like the Russos probably would have rathered there have not been a romance between Hulk and Black Widow, because it's just kind of like, how do we fit this in? Do we have them talk to each other there? It's just kind of like, they just kind of like look at each other a bit and they're like, okay. Like it's just kind of this awkward kind of thing, not just in this movie, but like carried on.
And there, at least you can just get away with, well, times have changed and they've both moved on and realized that this dalliance was not the best of ideas. Yeah. Much like to evoke Devil May Cry 5, that the solution to the long-running issue of how do you reconcile this series continuing to have Virgil when he died in Devil May Cry 1, but
spoilers.
but the prequel to 3, but the prequel game 3 made him an actually interesting and fun character. What do? How do you resolve this? And 5 solutions. Spoilers for 5. Not that you care about the intricate lore of these games. The solution they came up with is just say, well, he didn't die in 1. He got better.
Talking about like demon man things, it's fine. I love Devil May Cry 5. It's really, really good. You should play it.
You can play it and enjoy Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go through some notes, unless you've got a note that you're about to pull up?
No, I think you going through the notes is fine. Like if there's something that I really want to say. Yeah.
So the Hulkbuster scene has this line in the director's commentary. We didn't want to cheaply evoke 9/11. The closing scene of the Tony Stark fighting Hulk sequence is literally evoking the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Does he elaborate on that at all? Or does he just say that? Does he just say...
He was saying, it's this delicate balance you got to achieve in things, and like we wanted to have like the Hulk face to face with what he's done. It's an interesting moment because, like I said with Iron Man 1, that there has been this revenge for 9/11 theme that you get in a lot of Hollywood movies since then. And so we're starting to get this point of, like, maybe we can construct characters who are responsible for similar sorts of horrifying disasters.
Yeah, it's like, before that particular part, it is a fun action scene at the very least. Like, it is in like a very casual kind of way, just watching Hulk and Iron Man beat each other up. I love the fact that, and this is something that's in the comics and in the movies, the way that Iron Man keeps on making these specialized suits to fight certain things. I never seem to work out. It's like and you get the feeling that he probably wouldn't have beaten Hulk if the Hulk didn't have that little moment of he got better essentially. Like Banner, he knocked Banner out of it, but it was clear that Hulk was winning that fight until that happened. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of funny to me. It's this idea that Tony just keeps making these suits and they just get destroyed immediately.
All right, I just realized we haven't done the plot summary for this one. Can you summarize Age of Ultron?
Okay. Well, Tony's guilt manages to continue to be the main villain of the Avengers. And that is the plot. No, okay. The Avengers are together because they're hunting Hydra, and they're hunting specifically Loki's staff that has an Infinity Stone in it. They don't quite know that yet, but they know it's powerful.
They know it mind controls people and opens portals to space.
They know that having neo-fascist, neo-Hydra, whatever you want to call it, Hydra has it, and that's bad. So they're going around. They're trying to find it, and they eventually do. But unfortunately, that staff has been used to create these two not mutants, these two powered people, one that can do things with minds, one that's very, very fast. And that one person, Scarlet Witch, is the one who can do very strange magical stuff, and she messes with Tony's mind and kind of puts Tony in a sense of desperation that he's not doing enough to stop what's coming to Earth. Like he feels like there's something very big happening. He needs to do something about it. And his what he wants to do is he wants to create an AI essentially, a perfect.
He wants to build Skynet.
He wants to build Skynet because he feels like that would be the best way to protect the Earth as well as allowing all the Avengers to basically retire. So he's like, it's like a two-pronged thing.
Yeah, just make an automated defense system.
Yeah, which he's already starting to do with his
one that's actually got enough nuanced decision making to make ethically correct calls.
And which I feel does we'll talk about that later. We'll just talk about the plot of the film. So that goes horribly wrong because he tries to use the staff to create this AI, which eventually turns into Ultron. Ultron.
Well, I mean, it was always going to be called Ultron.
Yes, the system, the AI was going to be called Ultron.
He tries to make a protection AI, and instead it does what AIs do in sci-fi movies and decides to murder all of humanity.
Exactly. I would love to talk about Ultron in more depth later, but that's essentially what it decides to do. It decides to blow up humanity with a giant rock that it wants to create by basically moving a city high up into the atmosphere and then dropping it. Eventually, the Avengers come together despite having a lot of disagreements about both the creation of Ultron and how to defeat it. And so they kind of end the movie after defeating Ultron eventually. But there's these little elements of like you can tell they're not really on the same page, even if they're kind of happy with each other now. And that's kind of how the movie ends, actually. Really, like they just create an AI. AI turns bad. It tries to destroy the world. They come together, destroy it.
They make a new friend.
Yeah, they do make
Two
a
new friends.
They make okay.
3 new friends, but one of them
One
dies.
of them dies. Yeah, we have some additions to the Avengers. The main one probably being the Vision, who has the Mind Stone, which will be important later on. But that's I'd say the general basis.
The Vision, if you are unfamiliar with these movies, is Tony Stark's old talking computer friend Jarvis has now got an Infinity Stone powering him, and so he's now a sentient being called the Vision, who's a super robot that shoots lasers and can phase through things.
Imagine if Alfred turned into the Martian Manhunter in DC, and that's basically what the Vision is.
There's a pull quote. We'll be charging royalties on that one, Marvel. And they also have the Scarlet Witch, who, in the words of the film, her brother is Quicksilver, and in the words of the film, one of them goes fast and the other does weird things.
That's like when the movie is being good, when it has those little quips.
Yeah, those quippy moments are genuinely the strongest part. And Quicksilver dies because Fox has just released X-Men Days of Future Past with a much better depiction of Quicksilver, and Disney wants to buy it. And yes, the Scarlet Witch is now has become a good person, and she's gonna pop up in these movies. And the Vision is here. And there was somewhere I was going to go with here. Yeah, Quicksilver dies. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of sad. But I was also extremely happy at the time and watching it again. Because it wasn't after having an incestuous relationship with his sister. And then she deletes all the mutants from canon. House of M was a very, very dumb comic, everyone.
Another shock horror big Marvel event that wasn't very good.
Yeah, and I'm going to use that to segue into swerves. Because something that was mentioned in the commentary and is obvious watching the film is this film sets up a large pile of death flags for Hawkeye. You meet his family, his secret safe place where his family can live that he works hard to care for. He just wants to do a couple more missions and maybe it's time to hang up the bow and move on with his life and enjoy his family's life together. He's totally not gonna die, guys. Look at all these death flags he's setting off. But then instead, aha! We swerved you. Quicksilver's the one who dies, saving Hawkeye. Well, how about that? This had so little to the movie. In enjoyment, in themes, and narrative. It's just stuff that happens, and it exists purely to swerve the audience. To be, aha, you're a smart person, you know how stories are told. What if we do the different thing? Now, oftentimes, stories can be predictable, especially mainstream blockbuster entertainment, sci-fi action movies like the MCU. But there is a comfort and there is a joy to, if a story is predictable because it makes sense, then that's a good thing, because you're making sense. And from there, when your structure makes sense like that, it's a lot easier to then understand what it's actually saying about people and life and politics and whatever it's trying to discuss. So swerving for its own sake is often going to lead to a worse story and worse ideas, and just generally leave a more sour taste in your mouth, or just in this case, boredom. So it's a bunch of effort dedicated to something which doesn't need to be there.
I guess if you were being generous, you could say that at the very least we're exploring a character a bit more. Like, you're raising the death flags, but you're also like exploring Hawkeye, who was before this movie we knew very little about. And I think there was also kind of a
Now
sense
you know that he's a family man.
Yeah, well...
That's about it.
Yeah.
Hawkeye's just there. Like, I don't want to shit on Hawkeye, because, like, he shoots things with a bow, and that's neat. You can always do fun gimmicks with bows. He's just there, and he's fine.
It kind of... I guess in some ways it kind of leads into what we were talking about with the idea of a showrunner in charge of a movie, where it kind of felt like... In some ways, the movie, and I guess Joss Whedon by extension, kind of struggled to know how to explore characters without having time, without having, episodes of time where you can have, this is the Hawkeye episode, and this is where we go to his house and we see how what kind of character he is. And then if it was just one episode of a TV show, you'd be like, okay, we got to see more of our Hawkeye. And then next episode, you're like, okay, Iron Man's having a thing, and we're gonna learn more about him. And then that kind of leads into like,
movies. You basically only have time to do like 2 characters.
Yeah,
and often only 1.
Yeah, and in this case, like, even though maybe they were trying to make up for lost time with Hawkeye, considering he was mind controlled for most of Avengers 1 and wasn't in any... He needed to be in other movies. Thor. He was in Thor, technically. But, like, you definitely kind of felt like they were throwing Hawkeye a bone by having, like, him be shown to be almost the heart of the Avengers. There's a lot of talk about that, actually, like, where the... when the Avengers are at their most contentious, like when they're like arguing amongst themselves, there's a lot of talk of like, oh, well, somehow for some reason Clint is the one keeping them together because he has the power of heart apparently as well as the power of bow. And it just
shot through the heart, and Hawkeye's to blame.
Yep, gonna just
we're packing up there. See you next week.
But yeah, like it feels like they're throwing him a bone, and unfortunately, it's to the detriment of the movie because I don't think the stuff with him and his family fit in with what's going on in the rest of the movie. Like with the general idea of like both Ultron himself, the creation of Ultron, and the kind of themes of the movies evoking with that kind of stuff. Like generally, like, is it okay to make an AI to run the world? Is it okay to do it like this? What is Ultron trying to do? And how to then deal with him. Like feels so completely different than exploring Hawkeye's family life. Like it doesn't really fit together to me the way it probably should. And so I would not have done this.
The other problem is that essentially this is a film where the good guys have 2 low points and points of transition, where there's the first one where Ultron's beaten them up and done a bunch of stuff and smashed up their HQ. So they go and then their attempt to bust him while he's acquiring a bunch of vibranium, a rare metal from the country of Wakanda. And they're just raiding this ship, which has Andy Serkis on board it. Put a pin on Andy Serkis for a few weeks' time. And then they all get spooked by the Scarlet Witch doing spooky shit. And so then everyone's scared and sad, and then they're all yelling at each other, and then they learn things about working together as a team. And then they go do this long action sequence where they're trying to stop Ultron from making a better invincible body. And then they stop that, but also they're all even more beat up and also still very angry at each other. And so then they go then have another slow heart-to-heart and basically cover the same things. And then they go do the final big action set piece. And so it really feels like there's this large chunk in what is essentially the middle of the movie with the big chase to stop Ultron activating this new body, which doesn't need to be there. Like, narratively, it's redundant. Visually, it's fine, I guess, but there's too much. And so it makes the final scene less exciting by its existence, because you've already had a certain amount of thrills that you're willing to have for the runtime of the film. And then it just means that the movie is half an hour longer and doesn't really need to be.
Things are really ill-defined, I think, in the middle section. Like, especially the part where he's trying to get his new body. I feel like they don't really, like, they just kind of go over very, very quickly, and it doesn't, I don't think it really hits the audience very well exactly what Ultron's plan is and, like, how it's going to work. They're just like, he's got special metal, he's got a new body, and it will be impossible to defeat, and I just don't think that really, and I don't think clicks very well. And it means that while the action scene itself is perfectly fine, I think there's actually some interesting stuff going on in that. Like, I think Captain America actually in general has some really good action scenes in this movie, which is really nice. But him like fighting Ultron on the truck, and there's that really fun moment when his little drones like lift up the truck, like with their heads turning into thrusters. Like, it's a nice scene in that way, but in terms of like what it's about, it doesn't really. And it doesn't seem to work for me. The stakes aren't really there. And so it just kind of happens.
The spectacle always needs to have ideas that it's representing to really get you engaged.
Which is a shame. I'm not sure if you want to talk about this yet, but I really love what Ultron's, like, his feelings are, like his motivations, I think are really interesting and could have been far more interesting to explore more than they did, which was really not at all. He kind of just says things and no one no one refutes him. Like, I feel like there should have been scenes
no one
where...
talks with him.
Yeah.
He just monologues to sad people in a church.
Yeah.
And then they beat him up.
Like, and especially because
and the first time they really have an opportunity to have a conversation, because there's really only 2 points, that point and at the end.
Yeah.
And that first time they were just going, what? What's this? Which is fair enough because it's the end of the first act.
Yeah.
But yeah, they don't really have... This is, again, a similar problem to what I have with Infinity War, where no one really refutes what the villain is saying.
Yeah, we'll get to Infinity War, I guess.
Eventually.
Actually. Yeah, I definitely feel like, especially because we were talking before about how this feels like a very status quo movie, right? And in some ways, like, you could have probably used that a little bit in that Ultron is a perfect villain to try and disrupts a status quo because he's the one who's like, you know what, and this is something.
He has all the problems with the Avengers.
Yeah, and as well as and I think we actually talked about this before. I think, or at least we kind of skimmed it a little bit. And one of the things that at least I know I'm very interested in is the idea that why is it that superheroes, and I guess by extension all heroes almost, like, unless it's like 99% of all heroes want to live in a status quo that is established at the start of the story. Like, you might get a few stories where they're like rebels or something like that and they're trying to overthrow some kind of tyranny, but a lot of times it's like everything's fine, then a bad thing happens and hero goes to stop that bad thing from happening to return to a happier time where everything is fun and nice, which is the time they remember, right? And I feel like a lot of superheroes are kind of a bit like that in that they're trying to make sure everything... They're like firemen, right? They're like putting out fires, except these fires are aliens or some kind of monster. You know, they're trying to keep everything status quo. And I really love the idea of, like, you know, if you had such powers, maybe there are things in the world that aren't great that maybe you could try and help. Which is when we get to Black Panther, actually, there's some interesting stuff that happens with that. But and this is the kind of villain that can really kind of lay that bare in that he's like. He literally says, like, you want to save the world, but you don't want it to change. He has some great dialogue, Ultron. It's a shame. Like, it makes it sound like a deeper movie than it is, and it really could have been if they'd done a few things differently. Because Ultron,
he's fantastic, and just James Spader's portrayal of Ultron is delightful. Yeah. Where you get this real sense of someone who's really confused and angry and frustrated with his existence, with the people that he works with, that he's been made to serve, but ultimately he fundamentally is disagreeing with, and some of whom are very clearly doing things wrong because they're coming from a place of trauma and not getting the help that they need. And at the same time, even as he segues into the kitsch and the quirks, he does it so well. There was a story from the shoot where there's this one point where I think he like accidentally murders someone while he's on the ship or something. Yeah. He's halfway through a speech and he accidentally murders someone and then goes, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. And
okay, sorry, no, that he cuts off Sex's hand because he gets angry in an argument. And he's like, you should put some ice on that, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. He just goes, ooh, and the ooh was an ad-lib line by James Spader, and after they did that take is all, like, I put an extra word into the script, is that okay? And they're all, yes, that's okay.
It's that thing that, like, this happens to me a lot, actually, where I don't like a thing, but the reason why I don't like a thing is completely different to why other people don't like a thing. Like, a lot of people that, like, obviously I've been more negative toward this movie than positive so far in talking about it. And a lot of people haven't liked this movie, but when you talk to them about it, they'll say, like, oh, I hated Ultron in that movie. Well, for me, like, he was a highlight. He was a bright light in the movie. Like, his portrayal and everything about him I really enjoyed. Yeah. And I just think that, and I also wish, in terms of his final kind of attempts, I think it's a little bit of a shame that he goes so quickly from wanting, like he talks about the fact that he wants to change the world, that he thinks the Avengers are wrong because they're not letting humanity evolve, which is also strangely one of my favorite supervillains is Lex Luthor, who often talks about that kind of stuff with Superman, but that's a aside. But
Lex is so great because like that's all Carney talk from.
Oh
him.
yeah, it is kind of like it's perfect because while there is a point, it's clearly like coming from him. It's very like it's, as you say, it's a fake point, but that's like that can be great with villains though. So
yeah, it's fun.
yeah, and like with Ultron, he's kind of like, you know, you obviously going back to that line that I like the most, the one like you want to save the world, but you don't want it to change. Like you get the feeling that Ultron has just different ideas of how the world should be, like what saving it and protecting it might look like. And I wish that it went into more of that kind of stuff where he's like, no, I have to destroy the Avengers to implement my vision of the world that in his own way, whether being a villain or not, he thinks is better. And unfortunately, I do think that it's a shame that just turns into, I'm just going to drop a giant rock and I'm going to kill everyone. And then he's like, I feel like there's a
likewise, the discussions of the ramifications of what he's been doing and saying and the actions of Tony Stark just kind of turn into, well, I think you're wrong, says Steve Rogers, because you may end up making a death robot. Then he punctuates it by tearing some wood in half. Put a pin in that. I'll be getting back to it with Ant-Man. That's the level of depth that, for all that we have 2 end of Act 2 lowest point discussion periods, that's the level of depth we get to. There is, though, in its own way, this repetition and this tedium does lead to an interesting thing with Tony Stark, where Tony Stark, having, in his panic and his failures, freaked out and built a genocidal robot, his solution, once he's gotten back to his resources and can come up with some better approach to how to do this, his solution is to make another robot. And everyone, and then Bruce Banner's just, dude, no, what the fuck, no. And then everyone else comes in the room like, what the fuck, Tony? Why are you doing the exact same thing that got us here in the first place? And it's like, this is what anxiety does to you.
Even in a movie that was...
It's not framed that way, but like that's what happens.
Yeah. Tony, of course, remains one of the best characters in the MCU, and it's just really interesting to see his guilt and anxiety come out in this movie, in that he causes most of the problems and in some ways fixes them, but in such a roundabout way according to his anxieties. And yeah.
Like it's highly evocative of the sorts of issues that the tech industry in the real world has, where when you're working just with software, you can just kind of say, well, we'll fix it in the next patch, and that's easy to do. But like, say, when you've built enough money and resources that you're now controlling a large amount of the mainstream information flow, then anytime you have a little bug like this can happen. It can result in suddenly a mass movement supporting the removal of very useful health measures like vaccinations, resulting in poorer countries now being re-exposed to lethal diseases. That sort of thing can happen when you have a bug in a tech situation, and Tony Stark is perfectly demonstrating all those issues.
And in that way, that does kind of lead, of course, into Civil War, where like he's coming to the decision that he shouldn't be the one making these decisions that are so like vital to the world. Like in this case, it almost ended the world because Ultron was going to blow it up with an asteroid. So like, and that is actually interesting with Ultron in that like even and something that I kind of observe with these movies in general, it's like even the poor ones, either through design or through luck or through some modifications in later movies, tend to at least manage to do the bare minimum of setting up the next part of it. And that's one of the interesting with Ultron, where it didn't quite work out. There were some fun parts to it. I enjoyed watching some of it, but obviously it could have been a lot better. But it still manages to do just enough to set up what a movie that I much more liked, Civil War, and in general the Marvel movies in general.
What I love about Marvel is good enough is never good enough.
He said that.
Joss Whedon during this commentary. Oh yeah, so another note on why there's so many action scenes is because it's this weird production reason. which is that most of the actors weren't actually available in the early stages of the shoot. Some of them were on shooting a couple of other movies, and some of them are on maternity leave and doing tours for other movies that they'd worked on. So Hawkeye, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and a couple of others, I think Scarlett Johansson might have been available, were only available for like large parts of the climax shoot, which was some of the early stuff that they shot. And so that's why part of the film's excess is just this weird logistical thing where they didn't have the right actors to do the meaningful action, so they just shot a ton more action for its own sake, and then just inserted it into the film anyway, because we got it and we might as well give them their screen time that they worked for. Which is a understandable but flawed approach, I think, would be the best way to put that. Can we stop talking about this movie that puts me to sleep?
Yeah, I think we got through all the important parts. I guess I just will say that I don't hate the movie. I think there are parts of it that are quite fun, as we saw, the wit and the banter.
I don't hate this movie, but I would be happy to never see it again.
I definitely think that it is one of the least needed of the films. And I think maybe just a few more solo films instead of it would have actually made much more sense, with Civil War being the Avengers 2 instead. At least that's from my perspective. I think that might have worked a bit better.
And hey, it's been a while since... Alright, we'll see what the Avengers have happened to them after Endgame. But then, after this movie, came a movie which was very much like how after Avengers 1, it then went back to square one, let's do another Iron Man movie by himself. Likewise here, let's go back to square one, let's just introduce a new person completely by themselves, this really, dare I say, small-scale affair, and we'll fill in these little cracks that we can find in the lore of the MCU up to this point. Meanwhile, here's some other inconsequential guy who's doing a thing, stopping a crime, by doing a crime. Welcome to Ant-Man. And I like the choice of having Hank Pym as this old guy who's now teaching this other guy to do the Ant-Man thing and do some secret sneaking. What really stuck out, besides the first few notes of the soundtrack, which I'll get to in a bit, put a pin on that, is I liked, and this is probably a consequence of the first draft of the script being by Edgar Wright, who was to direct it until he had creative differences with Kevin Feige and left, is it is by far the most comic booky movie, and possibly really the most comic booky movie since Spider-Man 3 in terms of human history, where there is this gleefulness to the way it's bringing in the silliness of a superhero comic. There's like the ability to communicate with and control ants and make them do things for you, with like make them carry around tiny cameras so you can spy on stuff, make tiny saddles so you can ride on flying ants. There's the acting, especially by the lead villain, is glorious. He gives no fucks. He'll just straight up make these crazy megalomaniacal speeches directly to his employees' faces. He'll take you out on a dinner and then talk about like the need to purge our uncleanliness and shit. He's great, and everyone's leaning into this level of camp that the MCU's been intentionally avoiding up to this point. Like Kevin Feige, right through to Age of Ultron, was insisting like our cinematography's got to be built with realism in mind. And by this point, the script and the acting is willing to really deviate from that and go, like, this isn't some grand political drama. This is a little heist movie with a guy who can become the size of an ant and punch things hard while he's an ant. And so let's just roll with it. Let's have some fun, though. Edgar Wright is very clearly sorely missed in this because the script is not quite as tight after the rewrites. And the editing style of Edgar Wright is not there, where there is an energy and a style of cutting that he does throughout in scene to scene and across the entire film, where you always feel like you're moving towards somewhere. He simultaneously manages to make everything move really fast while also all being extremely memorable, whereas a lot of this is just shot and cut conventionally, which is to its detriment. but it's mostly fine. I'm sure that's what you're about to say on what's your thoughts on Ant-Man.
Yeah, fine is definitely the way to put it. I think it's definitely much stronger in its first act than it is in its second. And I think
and the third's like somewhere between.
Yeah. I do love the fact that it plays up how camp it is and how it wants to just be a fun little movie. And I feel like it's the perfect time to do that because it's an mostly inconsequential movie to the grander plot of things. And it kind of like, in that way, the fact that it's campier and sillier, it kind of fits into that quite well. So it's like the things are connecting well there.
It even treats the Avengers as being too big for what's happening as a joke.
Yeah. And I love the fact that the only person then who is taking it all seriously, kind of like
is a jobber for the Avengers.
Yeah. Well, that, and also I guess Hank Pym in general, like, Hank Pym is like this like old cranky man who I think to him, when he was a young man, he probably was really important. He would have been like an Avenger. But now he's just this old cranky guy who's just like, no, my technology is too strong to be used by these lunatics. I must hold it together. And I like that. I like the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that's its best point through most of it.
Right.
Well, that and the villain.
Yep. So what's the plot of Ant-Man?
Okay. Hank Pym, using a revolutionary particle, which he calls the Pym particle because he's a narcissist. He's able to create he's able to change how molecules work, and he's able to make things small. He makes things small, but they are able to keep like their level of strength or something. So like you can turn into this tiny little particle thing, but also punch with great effect. So it's a very strong weapon of war, essentially, of like stealth and sabotage, subterfuge and infiltration war. It's a very strong war suit. But he thinks it's too powerful, so he kind of locks it away until a scientist friend of his starts to rediscover the technology and wants to sell it to...
Specifically the new head of his private research company, because Hank Pym decided to be a private researcher instead of like something good for humanity.
Yeah, he decided to leave the horrible S.H.I.E.L.D. organization to make something even worse, a private organization. So so that's what's happening there. Meanwhile, what's his name? The main character's name. Oh no!
Bootleg Ryan Reynolds / Chris Pratt.
God, what's his name? Oh,
what is his name? Who cares?
Oh shit!
Protagonist Kun
is a thief. He gets very angry at corporations and rich people, so he's kind of like a Robin Hood kind of character, where he sort of
he robs from the rich and gives to the poor. They explicitly say that.
Yeah, but unfortunately he is caught. And that means he cannot see his family anymore because he can't get a job, he can't pay alimony, he can't pay
because he's in prison.
Yeah, because he's in prison, and even when he gets out, he can't because no one wants to hire him. But then he's told by his friends that there is a job for him, and they think that it's a really good score. It's an old man who's left his house, and there will be lots of money there. He tries to rob this house and finds, what do you know, the Ant-Man suit, the original that Hank Pym locked away, which turns out to just be an elaborate test by Hank Pym to find someone who wants to wear the suit and infiltrate his old company and take the Ant-Man technology away from this evil person who's going to sell it to the highest bidder. So that leads to potentially a heist movie where we're learning to plan out a heist of this facility. To stop this Ant-Man technology from going into the wrong hands, which takes up most of the movie, actually. That's the planning of it, the coming together. And eventually, Scott Lang. Scott. His name is Scott. He's said so many times in the movie. I'm so annoyed. Eventually, Scott and his friends are successful in that they stop the main villain from selling his technology. Eventually, the main bad guy is killed in a giant fight between, as they're both in the Ant-Man suits.
A giant or a tiny fight?
A tiny fight, sorry, but a giant in heart. Eventually, they stop the bad guy from selling the Ant-Man suit, and that saves the day.
And then kill him.
Which is good, because that guy was really, really bad.
He was literally a fascist, it turned out.
Yeah, basically.
Not basically, he said Hail Hydra. He's literally a fascist.
Yeah, he eventually decides to sell the the suit to Hydra, which is really funny. I love that scene. But
Well, the thing is, like, it's made clear earlier on in the movie that like this wasn't like Hydra cut him a deal. Like, he explicitly gave them a discount on this deal because he was also a member of Hydra.
Yeah, these nice men from Hydra. They have a lot of good ideas. Sorry, this villain is just so great. They stop him from selling the suit. They save the day, and eventually Scott's able to spend some time with his family, which is really nice.
Because he has now got a real job of being a hero. He is the man that his daughter always thought he was.
Yeah, and now the summary is over. I would like to talk about that, actually. One of my favorite parts of the film, I wasn't like, you think it'd be the comedy and that kind of stuff, but I actually really like, and this will be something that we see in Ant-Man 2, I really love the relationship between Scott and his daughter, and I love the fact that it's a very shortcutty kind of way to make.
I really hope the casting head for this movie got paid like $5 million for finding that girl.
She was good.
Because she's perfect.
Yeah, it's as I say, it's a very cheap way of you would call it a cheap pop if you were in wrestling, but you know, like down on his luck's father is a very easy character to root for, and it's Scott Lang's best feature, the fact that he cares so much about his daughter and being a good father to her. And it's that thing that allows him to be to be a thief. It allows him to be a criminal, and yet someone that we appreciate and root for the whole time. And that it's a very important part of the movie to me, even if it's not like he spends too much screen time with her or talking about her, but it's that constant thing that's just there under the surface, which gives us a reason to like Scott Lang.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about coding.
Okay.
We've talked about coding a bit already this episode. Coding is a combination of the technical components and the semiotic components of a work of media that convey a bunch of information about things. It's kind of like this holistic combination of like the sorts of the signs you use in conjunction with the way that you shoot those signs, the way that you edit those signs together in order to create meanings, often to create forms of visual shorthand that will convey lots of information in a short amount of time, often relying to a certain degree on stereotyping in order to get that across quicker and simpler.
Metonymy would be the word that might be used.
Yeah. Or so, like, say, if someone is being remorseful about something and then they lean down in any sort of churchy environment or in front of a window, the sort of thing that evokes prayer, even if they're not specifically a Catholic Christian. They'll do that sort of thing in film to indicate that, you know, they're being penitent and they're being remorseful about things. And you can do this a bunch of times and do different things, like we talked about in Iron Man 1, an example of masculine coding, where now that Tony Stark is a man of action rather than just an exploiter, that he now has to make a suit with his hammer and just hammer away and be like a blacksmith. We see that sort of masculine coding again in Age of Ultron, in the scene where Tony Stark and Steve Rogers are discussing whether he did the right thing while chopping wood, and Tony Stark's chopping it with an axe, which is pretty manly, but Steve Rogers proves that he is the greater man and the wiser man by tearing the wood in half with his bare hands. We talked about how there was a lot of coding around the Skrulls to make them look inhuman, and they give these unearthly roars and scamper around like they're orcs rather than actual human beings who are in a great deal of pain and frustration. And the opening moments of this film is the Marvel logo, as you do, playing some Latino pop music, followed by Scott Lang in a prison fighting a black man, followed by every person that he meets for the next couple of scenes being criminal-related, and they're all foreign. This is very, very common coding, that if you want to indicate that people are criminals, you make them foreign. You give them accents, you have them talk about their illegal immigrant relatives. Like, he talks like his other compatriots are a black man, a Russian, and a Latino fellow. And this Scott Lang is the only white guy who is seen in the prison. The other people who are good, like his daughter, his ex-wife, and her new boyfriend, who is also a cop. Literally a cop, yes. All representatives of the good, the way that life is meant to be, the way that you should be living your life, the correct way to do things. They even say things like, be the band that your daughter thinks you already are all white people. And this made me really, really uncomfortable with this depiction. Like, this is... I mean, it's kind of funny because of how often Marvel movies are used by DCEU tribalists and also just reactionary movements like Gamergate types to say that they're all these evil SJW Marvel movies. And like, if they actually gave a shit about those sorts of brands of social politics, they would not be putting coding like this in their movie. This is just what you do when you're a mainstream entertainment product. And like, the people who are in the cinematography and the scripting and the director's chair probably didn't give it a single thought about this sort of idea and what they're depicting here. It's just like, this is just how you make a movie. You just show some crooks. I mean, like, they're just some crooks. Like, there's probably other white criminals, but like, your movie's not bothering to show that sort of thing. And you're leaning to some dangerous stereotypes here, and I wasn't particularly comfortable with this. I'll probably talk about it more when we get to Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther, but something that's great about those movies is that those are the first ones to not be by Anglo-Americans or Anglo-Europeans. And by this point with Ant-Man, it was really, really hitting me seeing it now for the first time of, man, I'm really sick of these movies being made by white guys. I need some other voices in the creative process here, and we're going to finally get some in the coming weeks, and it's going to make me a lot happier. This is all really annoying, because this just put this unfortunate, really uncomfortable shadow over what is not the greatest movie of all time, but certainly a pretty fun one, as we just covered. What? No, go.
I guess at the very least you can say that even though it codes them in less than flattering ways and in ways that are kind of conforming to a norm that kind of like fits into people's minds about how criminals are and about foreign people in general. At the very least, I suppose, like, they are considered mostly good characters in terms of the
They are at least good
narrative
guys,
itself.
but they're also comic relief characters. So, then it's, haha, those silly savage foreigners, like, they can't quite live up to the burden of the white man here.
Although, at the very least, I mean...
Fuck white people.
Yeah.
Again, this is why I preface this episode with, here's a couple of white guys talking about movies.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's also the fact, at the very least, they are more helpful to him. The crooks in the actual plot of the story, in terms of like, and it's even though we said inconsequential, I mean, like, it's actually important that Ant-Man suit does not fall into the hands of Hydra, because that's bad. That would be like a lot of destruction, and they're certainly much more helpful to him in stopping that from happening than his wife is, or his policeman boyfriend who is actively trying to stop him.
Are they as useful and important as the rich white man?
No.
Who gave him the real power and the knowledge to utilize that power?
Yeah, true, but of course Hank Pym's got his own problems, where a lot of the, like, he gives him the power to stop it, but it's the same way Hank is also a giant reason why.
No, he is the entire reason why. He's all, I don't want this to go into the wrong hands. I'll move into the private sector. What could possibly go wrong?
That is weird.
Also,
and
he just won't listen to his extremely competent daughter at any time.
Yeah, that's
doesn't
another
trust her
frustrating.
with the knowledge that her mother died a hero.
That's interesting, because it's at once an infuriating storyline, but also one that it's one that works technically, in that I understand having a character like Hank Pym, like, he's a character that makes sense, but it's also tremendously frustrating to do that kind of story yet again, where the lady character is just completely sidelined. So it's like, even though the reasons, I guess, lore-wise make sense in terms of like the fact there has been so few.
There's in-universe justification, which isn't justification for writing your fiction that way.
Like, if Captain Marvel was like the first or second Marvel movie ever made, and there were plenty of like lady leads for MCU, that wouldn't have been as annoying. It'd just been like, okay, yeah, I can see like this lady wants to be a superhero, but her father, because of the loss that he's had, is refusing to allow her to do that, and be like, oh, that's a fair enough story. But because of the fact it's more of
Yeah.
a wider context.
Carol is
where
20 movies in,
Yeah.
not 3 movies in.
Yeah, so
Again, this is where the value of having other sorts of creative voices and telling stories for other sorts of audiences can be really useful for making potentially questionable decisions made in other movies actually just seem a lot less questionable when you've already proven that you can and do the right thing most of the time.
yeah, and that's is unfortunate for the movie. Like, it's unfortunate in both those counts. I think I noticed the daughter not being allowed to be the Wasp just yet, that or being a superhero, just, I guess, in more general way, to take a more leading hand in the movie, which was very frustrating to me, and especially in that kind of a story where it's just such a very common story. The idea of the older male character not letting go and not allowing the female one to do their own thing and to take the power and the reins, and that made it very frustrating.
And perhaps my favorite frustrating example of this sort of thing is an episode of Great Marzinger, the sequel to Marzinger Z, where the female support pilot does a big speech about how women can be useful and supportive and do good things, and goes out there and immediately gets her ass kicked, and so the man has to fix her problem. 1974. But it's not an excuse then, and it's not an excuse now.
The only bright light with that is, at the very least, in the sequel we will see that
the
character.
Wasp.
Yeah, and that's not even a spoiler to
It's
in
in the title.
It's in the title. So, and is at the end of this movie as well. So that's a guiding light there. Fortunately, not much is done with the other thing that we were talking about with the coding of criminals. Fortunately, that remains the same. But at least one part got better.
That wild ethnic flavor from the urban market.
You're stealing lines now. That's not fair. But yeah, that's frustrating.
That's basically all I have about Ant-Man, which is good because we've gone for over an hour and a half on this one.
The villain is amazing. Just to put that out there, he is really, really fun. Just like with Age of Ultron. So we've talked about 2 movies that were not perfect, but both had very, very good villains. So that's good at least.
Yeah, it's funny to think because there's this certain saying that goes that the Marvel comics were known for their better heroes and the DC comics for their better villains, but there's these moments in these movies where there's just really, really fun villains to watch doing stuff. And these 2 in particular were really bright shining lights after I where I had to really dig into the meaning of the text to talk about why Ronan is actually a good villain, even though on a base entertainment level he sucks really, really hard.
I think with Darren Cross, I can't believe the villain of Ant-Man, I have a feeling that there's a chance, it's just a theory, but I have a feeling that us in particular, the kind of people that we are, the humour of Darren Cross kind of comes across more to us than it might to others. I think it might be a little bit... I could imagine a more general audience seeing this. And
the more you woke you are, the more funny you'll find this.
Maybe. I don't know. I just have a feeling that general audiences might not fully appreciate just how funny this guy is. Maybe that's a bit elitist or something.
Well, you know how it is. Like I'm the worst smoked man on the planet, and I am never wrong. And you have the superior refined taste of a true artist. I can't words anymore. Just screw this. We'll talk to you next time. I think it's Civil War and Doctor Strange next time.
One really good movie and one that's okay.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'm going to come out being, Doctor Strange sucks, but we'll see how that goes next week. I don't have the list with me. It's nearly 1 a.m. I'd really like to go sleep, so we'll talk to you next time.
Play Devil May Cry 5. It's really good. And watch Captain Marvel 2. Also really good.
Captain Marvel 2? Whoa!
What's going to happen? Bye, guys.